Moving into chapter 6, section 7. Section 7 is all about inverses. You've probably heard the word inverse before. We've talked in the past about how multiplication and division are inverses of each other, but we haven't really talked about exactly what all that means. So anyway, our section is inverse relations. And functions. I guess the biggest point that we have made before with, for example, multiplication and division being inverses of each other is that they undo each other. In order to undo multiplication, we divide. In order to undo addition, we subtract. Last chapter, or I guess before our last test, you saw in order to undo the cube root, we cubed both sides, or in order to undo the 3/2 power, we take each side to the 2/3. That's all doing the inverse. But by definition, an inverse relation or I guess with inverse relations, plural, the domain of one relation, and we could be talking about a relationship or a function in general. The domain of one relation is the range of the other. And same thing with the range. The range of one relation is the domain of the other. Even easier way to think about it, here's the main point for inverse relations. The x and the y switch. Remember domain, that talks about our x values. Range talks about our y values. So that's our biggest point with inverses. The x and the y switch. As long as you can remember that, you'll be okay for most of this section. Okay, example 1. I'm just going to do one example that's like this. We are going to find what is the inverse of our table of values here. My table of values, I have -2, -1, 0, and 1 for my x values, 2, 0, 3, 0 for my y values. So my inverse again takes the domain of one relation, and that's the range of the other. So these x values now become my range. They're my y values for the inverse. These x values become my y values. And these y values, my original range, that becomes my x values. Now, one other thing to note, inverses aren't always functions of each other. If I look at my original relation here, each x value goes to only one y value. So I'm going to note here that this is a function. But let's look over here. Each x value, 0 is there twice. And that 0 goes to two different y values. This 0 goes to -1, this 0 goes to +1. That makes this relation not a function. Okay, so that's just kind of something to pay attention to, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But relations and their inverses aren't always both functions.